turn it up a little bit, I think. No, it's all the way. Hang on, let me see if I can get better lighting for us. So choose me the way you want it. Let's see. Ka-chunk. How's that, my friends? Oh my gosh. Ka-chunk, ka-chunk. I got my belly button re-pierced. Kind of. I just shoved it back in. Okay, are we ready? I was like, I need to hear this out loud. And I was like, I guess I should read it out loud. And I was like, you know, I'll just go on YouTube while I'm at it. Maybe you'll find it interesting as well. Data wrangling is the process of retrieving, cleansing, integrating, transforming, and enriching data to support subsequent data analysis. This valuable process focuses on transforming the raw data into a format that is more appropriate and easier to analyze. The objectives of data wrangling include improving data quality, reducing the time and effort required to perform analytics, and helping reveal the true intelligence in the data. Data wrangling is an essential part of business analytics. As mentioned in Chapter 1, the increasing volume variety of data compel organizations to spend a large amount of time and resources in garnering, cleaning, and organizing data before performing any analysis. What I'm finding interesting is that they're using a singular for data. Like, what did they say earlier? Data, instead of the data is, I think they're doing it as a plural. Data are. Data are not very useful. Where have I been? Where have I been? Data are? Not data is? Where have I been? In practice, the inability to clean and organize big data is among the primary barriers preventing organizations from taking full advantage of business analytics. Analytics professionals can no longer rely solely on the corporate IT department for data retrieval and preparation. According to interviews and expert estimates, analytics professionals spend from 58 to 80% of their time in the mundane task of collecting and preparing unruly data before analytics can be applied. As such, analytics professionals have to become more self-reliant and possess the necessary skills for data wrangling as well as performing data analysis. This practice allows organizations to address business problems much more quickly and make better informed decisions. At the same time, the self-service model requires analytics professionals to have a broader skill set than just statistical and data mining techniques. Data wrangling is the process of retrieving, cleansing, integrating, transforming, and enriching data to support subsequent data analysis. You're a data wrangler? Whoa! Yeehaw! We first provide an overview of data management. In a very broad sense, data management is a process that an organization uses to acquire, organize, store, manipulate, and distribute data. Organizations today have a plethora of data created and stored using different, often incompatible technologies. For the past few decades, most organizations have adopted the database approach for storing and managing data. This has tremendously improved the efficiency and effectiveness of the data management process and ultimately the quality of the data. A database is a collection of data logically organized to enable easy retrieval, management, and distribution of data. The most common type of database used in organizations today is the relational database. I have to put my hair up. Hang on, you guys. Watch my textbook for me. I'm also going to get some water. We got the rainbow cup. We got the rainbow hair clip. We're ready to rock and roll. I needed to drink water and reading aloud made it obvious. What do we got going on here? Oh. to databases, relational databases. A relational database consists of one or more logically related data files, often called tables or relations. Each table is a two-dimensional grid that consists of rows, also called records or tuples, and columns. I didn't know that about tuples. And columns, also called fields or attributes. A column, for example, the sex of a customer, price of a product, etc., contains a characteristic of a physical object, like a product or place, an event, a business transaction, or a person, customer, students. A collection of related fields makes up a record, which represents an object, event, or person. A software application for defining, manipulating, and managing data in databases is called a database management system, DBMS. Popular DBMS packages include Oracle, IBM, DB2, SQL Server, MySQL, and Microsoft Access. Data management is the process that an organization uses to acquire, organize, store, manipulate, and distribute data. The most common type of database, a collection of data, is the relational database. A relational database consists of one or more logically related data files where each data file is a two-dimensional grid that consists of rows or columns. Data manipulating data. Did you know they're manipulating data? To understand how and where data can be extracted, one needs to understand the structure of the data, also known as the data model. Data modeling is the process of defining the structure of the database. Relational databases are modeled in a way to offer great flexibility and ease of retrieval. The structure of the data, also known as the data model. An entity relationship diagram, ERD, is a graphical representation used to model the structure of the data. An entity is a generalized category to represent person, places, things, or events about which we want to store data in a database table. A single occurrence of an entity is called an instance. In most situations, an instance is represented in a record as a record in a database table. For example, Claire Johnson is an instance of a customer entity, and organic oatmeal is an instance of a product entity. Each entity has specific characteristics called attributes or fields, which are represented as columns in a database table. Customers' last names and product descriptions are examples of attributes in a database table. Entity relationships. Two entities can have a one-to-one or one-to-many or many-to-many relationship. I'm just confused because I'm taking 2 data classes and I thought this was the textbook for one class, but maybe I'm just learning the same thing in both classes. Not sure. I think this is actually for a different class than I thought. Business analytics. Communicating with numbers. Hard to say. We'll have to research that later. It doesn't matter. I have to read it anyways. Okay. Two entities can have a one-to-one, one-to-many, or many-to-many relationship with each other that represents certain business facts or rules. A one-to-one relationship is less common than the other two types. In a business setting, we might use a one-to-one relationship to describe a situation where each department can only have one manager and each manager can only manage one department. Recall Organic Food Superstore from the introductory case. Figure 2.1 shows an ERD for the store that illustrates examples of one-to-many and many-to-many relationship. The diagram shows 3 entities: customer, order, and product. The relationship between the customer and the order entities is one-to-many because one customer can place many orders over time, but each order can only belong to one customer. The relationship between order and product is many-to-many because an order can contain many products and the same product can appear in many orders. In Figure 2.1, each entity is represented in a rectangular shaped box in which attributes of the entity are listed. For each entity, there is a special type of attribute called the primary key, or PK, which is an attribute that uniquely identifies each instance of the entity. For example, customer ID is the primary key for the customer entity because each customer would have a unique ID number. Because the primary key attribute uniquely identifies each instance of the entity, it is often used to create a data structure called an index for fast data retrieval and searches. Some entities, for example order, have another special type of attribute called a foreign key. A foreign key is defined as a primary key of a related entity. Okay. Because customer ID is the primary key of the customer entity, which shares a relationship with the order entity, it is considered a foreign key in the order entity. A pair of primary and foreign keys is used to establish the one-to-many relationship between the two entities. By matching the values in the customer ID field of the customer and order entities, we can quickly find out which customer placed which order. The ERD in Figure 2.1 is not complete as it is missing the ordered products and purchase quantities in the order entity. Storing these data in the order entity is not appropriate as one does not know in advance how many products are going to be in each order, therefore making it impossible to create the correct number of attributes. To resolve this issue, we simply create an intermediate entity, order underscore detail, between the order and product entities, as shown in Figure 2.2, and as a result, the many-to-many relationship is decomposed into two one-to-many relationships. An order has many detailed line items, but each line item can only belong to one order. While a product may appear in many orders and order lines, an order line can only contain one product. In the order underscore detail entity, two attributes, order underscore ID and product underscore ID, together create a unique identifier for each instance. In this situation, order ID and product ID are referred to as a composite primary key, which is a primary key that consists of more than one attribute. We use a composite primary key when none of the individual attributes alone can uniquely identify each instance of the entity. For example, neither order ID nor product ID alone can uniquely identify each item of an order, but a combination of them can uniquely identify each line item. Because both order ID and product ID are primary keys of other entities related to order detail, they can also serve as foreign keys. By matching the primary key and foreign key pair, the system can quickly find out which order contains a line for a particular product. An entity relationship diagram is a schematic used to illustrate the structure of the data. An entity is a generalized category to represent person, places, things, or events. A relationship between the entities represents certain business facts or rules. Types of relationships include one-to-one, one-to-many, and many-to-many. A primary key is an attribute that uniquely identifies each instance of an entity, whereas a foreign key is the primary key of a related entity. A composite primary key is a primary key that contains more than one attribute. The data model represented in the ERD can be converted into database tables. Based on the ERD in Figure 2.2, shows various tables that can be created using organic food superstore sample data. Can you find out which customer placed an order for organic sweet potatoes on October 15th, 2018? Did this customer order any other products? By matching the primary and foreign keys of customer, order detail, and product tables, we can establish relationships among these tables. With relationships, we can extract useful information from multiple tables. For example, using his customer ID, we learned that James Anderson was the customer who placed an order on October 15th, 2018 using his mobile phone and paying for the order with his PayPal account. In addition, we can also see that he purchased organic sweet potato and organic oatmeal. Once the data are stored, this is data retrieval in the database environment. Once data are stored in a relational database, we can retrieve them using a database query. The most popular query language today is structured query language, or SQL. SQL is the language for manipulating data in a relational database using relatively simple and intuitive commands. While a comprehensive discussion of SQL is beyond the scope of this text, we briefly demonstrate how simple SQL statements can be used to retrieve data from a database. The basic structure of a SQL statement is relatively simple and usually consists of three keywords: select, from, and where. The select keyword is followed by the names of attributes we want to retrieve. The from keyword specifies the tables from which to retrieve the data. We usually want to retrieve data based on selection criteria specified in the where clause. The following SQL statement retrieves first and last names of the customers who live in Los Angeles from the customer table. Select underscore name, comma, first underscore name. From customer where city equals Los Angeles, in quotes. While simple queries like the previous one are useful, we often need to compile data from multiple tables and apply more than one selection criteria. For example, we may want to retrieve the customer order names, IDs, and order quantities of organic sweet potato purchases on October 15th, 2008. The following SQL query returns this information. Select customer. Okay, I'm not going to read you guys this code. Because the select clause specifies the attributes to retrieve, and these attributes may come from different tables. We use the table underscore name dot attribute underscore name format to tell the DBMS from which table the attributes are retrieved. For example, customer last name refers to the last name, an attribute in the customer table. The from clause lists all the tables that have the attributes to be retrieved and the attributes used in the selection criteria. The where clause lists multiple conditions and links them using the and keyword. The last three conditions match the values of the primary and foreign key pairs based on the relationships depicted in figure 2.2. In a relational database, data can be retrieved using structured query language, SQL statements whose basic structure consists of the select from and where keywords. SQL statements specify the attributes, tables, and criteria the retrieved data must mean. While the SQL commands in the previous two examples provide the flexibility for data retrieval, many modern DBMS packages such as Microsoft Access, Oracle, and SQL Server often offer a graphical interface option where the user constructs a database query by dragging and dropping the query components like field tables, conditions, etc. into a form. The DBMS then translates the user selections into SQL statements to retrieve the data. Although the relational database environment provides businesses with efficient and effective ways to manage data, the proliferation of isolated databases maintained by different business departments makes it difficult to analyze data across departments and business units. This phenomenon has also given rise to the data redundancy and inconsistency. As a result, many organizations have developed an enterprise data warehouse which offers an integrated, accurate, single version of truth to support decision making. Very interesting. An enterprise data warehouse or data warehouse is a central repository of data from multiple departments within an organization. One of its primary purposes is to support managerial decision making, and therefore data in a data warehouse are data in a data warehouse are usually organized around subjects such as sales, customers, or products that are relevant to business decision making. In order to integrate that data from different databases generated by various business departments, an extraction, transformation, and load ETL, extraction, transformation, and load ETL process is undertaken to retrieve, reconcile, and transform data into a consistent format and then load the final data into a data warehouse. A data warehouse provides a historical and comprehensive view of the entire organization. As you can imagine, the volume of the data in a data warehouse can become very large very quickly. While a data warehouse integrates data across the organization, a data mart is a small-scale data warehouse or a subset of the enterprise data warehouse that focuses on one particular subject or decision area. For example, a data mart can be designed to support marketing department for analyzing customer behaviors, and it contains only the data relevant to such analysis. The structure of a data mart conforms to a multidimensional data model called a star schema, which is a specialized relationship database model. In the star schema, there are two types of tables, dimension and fact tables. The dimension table describes business dimensions of interest, such as customer, product, location, and time. The fact table contains information about the business operations, often in a quantitative format. A data warehouse is a central repository of data from multiple departments within an organization to support managerial decision making. Analytics professionals tend to acquire data from data marts, which are small-scale data warehouses that only contain data that are relevant to certain subjects or decision areas. Data in a data mart are organized using a multidimensional data model called a star schema, which includes dimension and fact tables. Each of the dimension tables has a one-to-many relationship with the fact table. Hence, the primary keys of the dimension table are also the foreign keys in the fact table. At the same time, the combination of primary keys of the dimension table forms the composite primary key of the fact table. The fact table is usually depicted at the center, surrounded by multiple dimension tables forming the shape of a star. In reality, it is not uncommon to see multiple fact tables sharing relationships with a group of dimensional tables in a data mart. One of the key advantages of the star schema is its ability to slice and dice data based on different dimensions. For example, in the data model shown in Figure 2.3, sales data can be retrieved based on who the customer is, which product or product category is involved, the year, quarter, or month of the order, where the customer lives, or through which channel the order was submitted, simply by matching the primary keys of the dimension tables with the foreign keys of the fact tables. In recent years, new forms of database to support big data have emerged. The most notable is the NoSQL, or Not Only SQL database. The NoSQL database is a non-relational database that supports the storage of a wide range of data types, including structured, semi-structured, and unstructured data. It also offers the flexible performance and scalability needed to handle extremely high volumes of data. Analytics professionals will likely see NoSQL databases implemented alongside relational databases to support organizations' data needs in today's environment. Here's the star chart. Can you tell it's a star? Whoa. All right. I don't know if I can. Uh-huh. I think I did it. No, I guess we don't have all fans of business. Once the raw data are extracted from the database, data warehouse, or data mart, we usually review and inspect the data set to assess data quality and relevant information for subsequent analysis. In addition to visually reviewing data, counting and sorting are among the very first tasks most data analysts perform to gain better understanding and insights into the data. Counting and sorting data help us verify that the data set is complete or that it may have missing values, especially for important variables. Sorting data also allows us to review the range of values for each variable. We can sort data based on a single variable or multiple variables. We demonstrate how to use counting and sorting features in Excel and R to inspect and gain insights into the data. While these features also allow us to detect missing values, we discuss treatment of missing values in section 2.3. Business is the primary religion on earth. It's a thought form. Unimagic, do you use R? I never even heard of R. And now I'm supposed to know it. Balance Gig is a company. I don't want to read this stupid example. Oh my god, it's so long. Honestly, I was supposed to do some homework with R, and I was like, Chat GPT was like, and it gave me like a whole chart. I was like, okay, great. All right, once we have inspected and explored data, we can start the data preparation process. In this section, we examine two important data preparation techniques: handling missing values and subsetting data. As mentioned in section 2.2, there may be missing values in the key variables that are crucial for subsequent analysis. Moreover, most data analysis projects focus only on a portion or subset of the data rather than the entire data set. Or sometimes the objective of the analysis is to compare two subgroups of the data. Yeah, we're supposed to use it to like make meaning out of data. We'll see. I mean, ChatGPT can do it, so I don't think I need to memorize that, but we'll see. Maybe they will make me do it for tests. Missing values are a common data quality problem found in data sets both large and small. This is called handling missing values. Hey, thanks, Blueberry. This issue can lead to significant reduction in the number of usable observations and biases in analysis results. For example, in a data set with 20 variables, if 5% of the values spread randomly across the observations and variables are missing, then potentially only 1 to 0.05 to the 20th equals 0.358 or 35.85% of the observations would be complete and usable. Understanding why the values are missing is the first step in the treatment of missing values. Sometimes data are missing because the respondents decline to provide information due to its sensitive nature, for example, race, sexual orientation, economic status, etc. In these cases, missing values are usually not distributed out randomly across observations, but tend to concentrate within one or more subgroups. For example, research has shown that male respondents often skip questions related to depression in a survey. In other cases, data values are missing because some of the items do not apply to every respondent. For instance, patients who are still in the hospital do not have values in the discharge date column. Missing values can also be caused by human errors, sloppy data collection, and equipment failures. Because missing values are often unavoidable in real life, it's important to learn how to handle observations with missing values. There are two common strategies for dealing with missing values: omission and imputation. The omission strategy, also called complete case analysis, recommends that observations with missing values be excluded from the analysis. This approach is appropriate when the amount of missing values is small or missing values are concentrated in a small number of observations. Otherwise, it can lead to severe loss of data, as illustrated earlier. I'm glad I'm not the only one. Every time I say it, I'm like, how did I miss this one? How is this the first time I'm hearing about this, McGraw-Hill? The imputation strategy replaces missing values with some reasonable inputted values. The most commonly used imputation strategy for numerical variables is the simple mean imputation, where the missing values are replaced with the mean or average values across relevant observations. For example, if the annual household income for an observation is missing, we replace the missing value with the mean household income across all observations or across a homogeneous group. Simple mean imputation is easy to implement and allows observations with missing values to be included in the analysis without adding more variability to the data set. However, if a large number of missing values need to be imputed, simple mean imputation will likely distort the relationship among the variables, leading to biased results. For example, the total square footage of a house tends to have a positive relationship with the value of the house. If a dataset contains many missing total square footage values and these missing values are replaced with a mean total square footage of the rest of the houses in the dataset, then the relationship between total square footage and house value will likely be distorted. More advanced imputation techniques, such as regression, mean imputation that better preserve the relationship among variables, can be used in these cases. Advanced imputation techniques are beyond the scope of this text. In the case of categorical variables, the most frequent category is often used as the inputted value. For instance, if some values of sex are missing in a data set, we might replace those missing values with the predominant sex category among the rest of the observations. For categorical variables, an unknown category may be created to signify missing values. This approach is especially useful if the data are missing for a reason. The fact that these values are missing for these observations may suggest certain patterns in the relationships in the data. In addition to the omission and imputation strategies, other approaches may be considered when handling missing values. If the variable that has many missing values is deemed unimportant or can be represented using a proxy variable that does not have missing values, the variable may be excluded from the analysis. Finally, some analytics techniques, such as decision trees, are robust and can be applied to data sets, even with the inclusion of missing values. I think they're talking about the predominant sex within a specific study. There are two common strategies for dealing with missing values. The omission strategy recommends that observations with missing values be excluded from subsequent analysis, and the imputation strategy recommends that the missing values be replaced with some reasonable imputed values. For numerical variables, it is common to use mean imputation. For categorical variables, it is common to impute the most predominant category. Another important data preparation task involves the treatment of extremely large or of extremely small or large values referred to as outliers. I have never imputed any data in my life. Honestly, it sounds sus. Just throw some numbers in there. It's fine. It doesn't seem fine. It doesn't seem fine the way they're making it sound. Another important data preparation task involves the treatment of extremely small or large values referred to as outliers. It is noteworthy that in the presence of outliers, it is preferred to use the median instead of the mean to impute missing values. Both analytical solver and R allow easy imputation with the median computed by using the median data range function in Excel or the median function in R. The process of extracting portions of a data set that are relevant to the analysis is called subsetting. Read that again. The process of extracting portions of a data set that are relevant to the analysis is called subset. It is commonly used to pre-process the data prior to analysis. For example, a multinational company has sales data for its global operations and it creates a subset of sales data by country and performs analysis accordingly. For time series data, which are data indexed in time order, we may choose to create subsets of recent observations and observations from the distant past in order to analyze them separately. Subsetting can also be used to eliminate unwanted data, such as observations that contain missing values, low quality data, or outliers. Sometimes subsetting involves excluding variables instead of observations. For example, we might remove variables that are irrelevant to the problem, variables that contain redundant information, for example, property value and property tax, or an employee's age and experience, or variables with excessive amounts of missing values. Subsetting is the process of extracting parts of a data set that is of interest to the analytics professional. Subsetting can also be performed as a part of descriptive analytics that helps reveal insights in the data. For example, by subsetting student records into groups with various academic performance levels, we may be able to identify high achieving students and relevant attributes that contribute to their success. Similarly, by comparing subsets of medical records with different treatment results, we may identify potential contributing factors to success in a treatment. Note that the sex, education level, and income of the patients differ considerably between the two subsets. Not surprisingly, male patients, especially those with higher education and income levels, have better success with tuberculosis treatment than female patients with lower education and income levels. The symbol analysis highlights the importance of contributing factors in tuberculosis control efforts. Lord Almighty. Data transformation is the data conversion process from one format or structure to another. It is performed to meet the requirements of statistical and data mining techniques used for the analysis. Examples of transforming numerological data, I made a word up, hang on. Examples of transforming numerical data include transforming an individual's date of birth to age, combining height and weight to create body mass index, calculating percentages, or converting values to natural logarithms. Sometimes it makes sense to group a vast range of numerical values into a smaller number of bins. For example, we might want to arrange numerical ages into age intervals such as 20 to 39, 40 to 59, 60 to 80, or convert dates into seasons such as fall, winter, spring, and summer. Data transformation is the data conversion process from one format or structure to another. I struggle with programming fundamentals. It doesn't make no sense to me. I don't like following rules that close. In this section, we describe techniques for transforming numerical variables into categorical values, or binning, and mathematical transformations of numerical variables. Binning. Binning sounds like winning. Binning is the process of transforming numerical variables into categorical variables by grouping the numerical values into small number of groups or bins. It is important that bins are consecutive and non-overlapping so that each numerical value falls into one and only one bin. For example, we might want to transform income values into three groups: below 50,000, between 50,000 and 100,000, and above 100,000. These three income groups can be labeled low, medium, and high, or 1, 2, 3. Binning can be an effective way to reduce noise in data if we believe that all observations in the same bin tend to behave the same way. For example, the transformation of the income values into three groups makes sense when we are most interested in a person's earning power, low, medium, or high, rather than the actual income value. Binning is a common data transformation technique that converts numerical variables into categorical variables by grouping the numerical values into a small number of bins. As noted above, binning reduces the noise of the data, often due to minor observation errors. For example, With binning, outliers in the data, like individuals with extremely high income, perhaps recorded incorrectly, will be part of the last bin and therefore will not distort subsequent data analysis. Binning is also useful in categorizing observations and meeting the categorical data requirements of some data mining analytics techniques, such as naive Bayes. In addition to binning numerical values according to user-defined boundaries, bins are also created to have equal intervals. For example, we can create bins that represent an interval of 10 degrees in temperature or 10 years in age. We can also create bins of equal counts where individual bins have the same number of observations. For example, by binning a class of 200 students into 10 equal-sized groups based on their grades, we can find out the relative academic standing of the students. Students in the bin with the highest grades represent the top 10% of the class. Binning! Students are encouraged to experiment with other binning options with the customer data. For example, experiment with binning income into two categories, high and low, or redesign the membership program with 4 or 5 tiers. There are many real-life applications where numerical variables should be converted into categories, and the number of categories should be determined appropriately according to the context of the analysis. Mathematical transformations. As discussed earlier, data transformation is an important step in bringing out the information of the dataset, which can then be used for further data analysis. In addition to binning, another common approach is to create new variables through mathematical transformation of existing variables. For example, to analyze diabetes risk, doctors and dietitians often focus on body mass index, or BMI, which is calculated as weight in kilograms divided by squared height in meters, rather than focusing on weight or height alone. Similarly, in order to analyze trend, we often transform raw data values into percentages. Sometimes data on variables such as income, firm size, and house price are highly skewed. Skewness is discussed in section 3.4 of chapter 3. For example, according to a Federal Reserve report, the richest 1% of families in the U.S. controlled 38.6% of the country's wealth in 2016. The extremely high or low values of a skewed variable significantly inflate or deflate the average for the entire data set, making it difficult to detect meaningful relationships with skewed variables. A popular mathematical transformation that reduces skewness in data is the natural logarithmic function. Another transformation to reduce data skewness is the square root transformation. Another common data transformation involves calendar dates. Statistical software usually stores date values as numbers. For example, in R, date objects are stored as the number of days since January 1st, 1970, using negative numbers for earlier dates. That broke me. For example, January 31st, 1970 has a value of 30, and December is like BCE for 1970. Like, ha! And December 15th, 1969 has a value of negative 17. Excel implements a similar approach to store date values, but uses a reference value of 1 for January 1st, 1900. Transformation of date values is often performed to help bring useful information out of the data. A retail company might convert customers' birth dates into ages in order to examine the differences in purchase behaviors across age groups. Similarly, by subtracting the airplane ticket booking date from the actual travel date, an airline carrier can identify last-minute travelers who may behave differently from early planners. Sometimes transforming date values into seasons helps enrich the data by creating relevant variables to support subsequent analysis. For example, by extracting and focusing on months in which gym memberships first joined the health club, we may find that members who joined during the summer months are more interested in the aquatic exercise programs, whereas those who joined during the winter months are more interested in the strength training programs. This insight can help fitness clubs adjust the marketing strategies based on seasonality. (1970) 1970 is when we're going to start. Sounds about right. 1970. Another common transformation for numerical data is rescaling, which is performed when the variables in a data set are measured using different scales. For example, annual income measured in dollars typically ranges from thousands to millions, whereas the number of children typically contains values in low single digits. The variability in measurement scales can place undue influence on large scale variables, resulting in inaccurate outcomes. Therefore, it is commonplace to rescale the data using either standardization or normalization, especially in data mining techniques. I don't know what the words standardization and normalization mean. I'm gonna have to look those up. How long is this chapter? As discussed in chapter 1, we use labels or names to identify the distinguishing characteristics of a categorical variable. For instance, a firm may identify each customer as either a male or female, which would be incorrect. Here, the sex of a customer is a categorical variable representing two categories. Categorical variables can also be defined by more than two categories. Examples include marital status. I like that I read that as Marshall. Marital status, single, married, widowed, divorced, separated, and the performance of a manager, excellent, good, fair, poor. Recall that we use nominal and ordinal. I have to slow down. Recall that we use nominal and ordinal measurement scales to represent categorical variables. In the above examples, the measurement scales for marital status and performance of a manager are nominal and ordinal, respectively. While categorical variables are known to represent less sophisticated levels of measurement, they are often the most important variables in the analysis. For example, the sex of a customer may contain the most useful information on the customer's spending behavior. Categorical data do, however, present unique challenges in data wrangling. As many analysis techniques are limited in their ability to handle categorical data directly, steps to simplify or transform categorical data into numerical formats are often performed prior to analysis. In this section, we discuss three common approaches for transforming categorical data: category reduction, dummy variables, and category scores. Sometimes nominal or ordinal variables come with too many categories. This presents a number of potential problems. First, variables with too many categories pull down model performance because, unlike a single parameter of a numerical variable, several parameters associated with the categories of a categorical variable must be analyzed. Second, if a variable has some categories that rarely occur, it is difficult to capture the impact of these categories accurately. In addition, a relatively small sample may not contain any observations in certain categories, creating errors when the analytical model is later applied to a larger data set with observations in all categories. Third, if one, I gotta look up what normalized means. Third, if one category clearly dominates in terms of occurrence, the categorical variable will fail to make a positive impact because modeling success is dependent on being able to differentiate among the observations. An effective strategy for dealing with these issues is category reduction, where we collapse some of the categories to create fewer non-overlapping categories. Determining the appropriate number of categories often depends on the data context and the disciplinary norms, but there are a few general guidelines. The first guideline states that categories with very few observations might be combined to create the other category. For example, in a data set that contains the demographic data about potential customers, if many zip code categories have only a few observations, it is recommended that an other category be created for these observations. The rationale behind this approach is that a critical mass can be created for this other category to help reveal patterns and relationships in data. Another guideline states that categories with a similar impact may be combined. For example, when studying public transportation ridership patterns, one tends to find that the ridership levels remain relatively stable during the weekdays and then change drastically for the weekends. Therefore, we may combine data from Monday through Friday into the weekday category and Saturday and Sunday into the weekend category to simplify data from 7 to only 2 categories. You can talk. You're not interrupting me. It makes it less lonely. I have 10 people listening to this. You guys are dedicated learners. In many analytical models, such as regression models discussed in later chapters, categorical variables must first be converted into numerical variables. For other models, dealing with numerical data is often easier than categorical data because it avoids the complexities of the semantics pertaining to each category of the variable. A dummy variable, also referred to as an indicator or a binary variable, is commonly used to describe two categories of a variable. It assumes a value of 1 for the category and 0 for the other category, referred to as the reference or the benchmark category. For example, if we can define a dummy variable to categorize a person's sex using 1 for male and 0 for female, triggered, using females as the reference category, dummy variables do not suggest any ranking of the categories. And therefore, without any loss of generality, we can define 1 for female and 0 for male using males as the reference category. All interpretation of the results is made in relation to the reference category. A dummy variable. A dummy variable, also referred to as an indicator or binary variable, takes on a value of 1 or 0 to describe two categories of a categorical variable. Oftentimes, a categorical variable is defined by more than two categories. For example, the mode of transportation used to commute may be described by three categories: public transportation, driving alone, and carpooling. Given k categories of a variable, the general rule is to create k minus 1 dummy variables, using the last category as reference. For the mode of transportation example, we need to define only two dummy variables. Suppose we define two dummy variables as d1 and d2, where d1 equals 1 for public transportation, 0 otherwise, and d2 equals 1 for driving alone, 0 otherwise. Here, carpooling, the reference category, is indicated when d1 equals d2 equals 0. Therefore, adding the third dummy variable for carpooling would create information redundancy. Certain analytical models cannot even be estimated with k dummy variables. No idea what that was talking about. Not a clue. Category scores. Finally, another common transformation of categorical variables is to create category scores. This approach is most appropriate. I like the word appropriate in this book. I was once in a psych ward and a guy who kept saying he from F. Okay, finally, another common transformation of categorical variables is to create category scores. This approach is most appropriate if the data are ordinal and have natural ordered categories. For example, in customer satisfaction surveys, we often use ordinal scales such as very dissatisfied, somewhat dissatisfied, neutral, somewhat satisfied, and very satisfied to indicate the level of satisfaction. While the satisfaction variable is categorical, the categories are ordered. In such cases, we can recode the categories numerically using numbers 1 through 5, with 1 being very dissatisfied and 5 being very satisfied. This transformation allows the categorical variable to be treated as a numerical variable in certain analytical models. With this transformation, we need not convert a categorical variable into several dummy variables or to reduce its categories. For an effective transformation, however, we assume equal increments between the category scores, which may not be appropriate in certain situations. I'm reading a textbook called Business Analytics: Communicating with Numbers. That's my homework. It's a long chapter. We finished it though. Chapter 3. We did it. Thank you for joining me for Business Analytics: Communicating with Numbers. By McGraw-Hill. Hi, everyone. Had a feeling it was some business textbook. Yeah. Oh, my shoulders. I had ChatGPT do the programming part, so that's done. Now I have to go read a bunch of organizational behavior stuff, which is exciting. I wasn't gonna read it, and then someone was like, "You have to read those because she references them on the test." I was like, "Got it." Should I read them to you all? I'm gonna read them to you. Otherwise, I'm not gonna read them. Hang on, let me go get my computer. All right, we're gonna change it up because I can't lay on my shoulders anymore. Retouch on. Ooh, that was an accident. Let me get my special pillow. Scoot you on up here. Let's scoot you on up here. What's your test on? Oh, hang on. I'm making chaos. Categorical chaos. Chaos of a categorical nature. In this case, it is appropriate to assume that all numbers in the variable data set can be combined to create. Yo. Okay. Chapter 2, Business Analytics. Yes, I completed that. This girl made this spreadsheet of all the homework for all the classes and the dates that it's all due. Like, wow, I'm gonna have to make one of those. And she's like, I can just send it to you. Like, oh my god. I love this pillow. I've had this pillow since I was pregnant. I bought so many pillows when I was pregnant. Literally, like, I think I spent like $400 on pillows. I bought every type of pillow. I was so uncomfortable. You have to understand, I was so uncomfortable. I was like, will this pillow help me? Even still, there were pillows I wanted to buy. I didn't buy all the pillows I wanted to buy. All right. Organizational behavior. These readings seem so boring, but we're gonna do it. Okay. I think we're gonna read this one first. It's called. Did I already download this? Yeah. School. On the folly of rewarding A while hoping for B. Illustrations are presented from society in general and from organizations in particular. Isn't it crazy how different the energy is of this text compared to the last one? Reading matters. Sorry, I'm turning this off. It's looking weird to me. Illustrations are presented from society in general and from organizations in particular of reward systems that pay off for one behavior even though the rewarder hopes dearly for another. Portions of the reward systems of a manufacturing company and an insurance firm are examined and the consequences discussed. Whether dealing with monkeys, rats, or human beings, it is hardly controversial to state that most organisms seek information concerning what activities are rewarded and then seek to do or at least pretend to do those things, often to the virtual exclusion of activities not rewarded. The extent to which this occurs, of course, will depend on the perceived attractiveness of the rewards offered, but neither operant nor expectancy theorist would quarrel with the essence of this notion. Nevertheless, numerous examples exist of reward systems that are fouled up in that behaviors which are rewarded are those which the rewarder is trying to discourage, while the behavior he desires is not being rewarded at all. In an effort to understand and explain this phenomena, this paper presents examples from society and organizations in general and from profit making firms in particular. Data from a manufacturing company and information from an insurance firm are examined to demonstrate the consequences of such reward systems for the organizations involved and possible reasons why such reward systems continue to exist are considered. Societal examples. Politics. Official goals are purposefully vague and general and do not indicate the host of decisions that must be made among alternative ways of achieving official goals and the priority of multiple goals. They usually may be relied on to offend absolutely no one, and in this sense can be considered high acceptance, low quality goals. An example might be build better schools. Operative goals are higher in quality but lower in acceptance since they specify where the money will come from, what alternative goals will be ignored, etc. The American citizenry supposedly wants its candidates for public office to set forth operative goals, making their proposed programs perfectly clear, specifying sources and use of funds, etc. However, since operative goals are lower in acceptance, and since aspirants to public office need acceptance, from at least 50.1% of the people, most politicians prefer to only speak of official goals, at least until after the election. They, of course, would agree to speak at the operative level if punished for not doing so. The electorate could do this by refusing to support candidates who do not speak at the operative level. Instead, however, the American voter typically punishes, withholds support from candidates who frankly discuss where money will come from, and rewards politicians who speak only of official goals, but hopes candidates, despite the reward system, will discuss the issues operatively. It is academic whether it was moral for Nixon, for example, to refuse to discuss his 1968 secret plan to end the Vietnam War, his 1972 operative goals concerning the lifting of price controls, the reshuffling of his cabinet, etc. The point is that the reward system made such refusal rational. It seems worth mentioning that no manuscript can adequately define what is moral and what is not. It seems worth mentioning that no manuscript can adequately define what is moral and what is not. However, examination of cost and benefit combined with knowledge of what motivates a particular individual will often suffice to determine what for him is rational. If the reward system is so designed that it is irrational to be moral, this does not necessarily mean that immorality will result. But is this not asking for trouble? War. If some oversimplification may be permitted, let it be assumed that the primary goal of the organization, Pentagon, Luftwaffe, or whatever, is to win. Let it be assumed further that the primary goal of most individuals on the front lines is to get home alive. Then there appears to be an important conflict in goals. Personally, rational behavior by those at the bottom will endanger goal attainment by those at the top, but not necessarily. It depends on how the reward system is set up. The Vietnam War was indeed a study of disobedience and rebellion, with terms such as fragging, which means killing one's own commanding officer, and search and evade becoming part of the military vocabulary. The difference in subordinates' acceptance of authority between World War II and Vietnam is reported to be considerable, and veterans of the Second World War often have been quoted as being outraged at the mutinous actions of many American soldiers in Vietnam. Consider, however, some critical differences in the reward system in use during the two conflicts. What did the GI in World War II want? To go home. And when did he want to get home? When the war was won. If he disobeyed the orders to clean out the trenches and take the hills, the war would not be won, and he would not go home. Furthermore, what were his chances of attaining his goal, getting home alive, if he obeyed the orders compared to his chances if he did not? What is being suggested is that the rational soldier in World War II, whether patriotic or not, probably found it expedient to obey. Consider the reward system in use in Vietnam. What did the man at the bottom want? To go home. And when did he want to go home? When his tour of duty was over. This was the case whether or not the war was won. Furthermore, concerning the relative chance of getting home alive was by obeying orders compared to the chance if they were disobeyed, it is worth noting that a mutineer in Vietnam was far more likely to get assigned to rest and rehabilitation on the assumption that fatigue was the cause than he was to suffer any negative consequences. In his description of the zone of indifference, Barnard stated that a person can and will accept a communication as authoritative only when, at the time of his decision, he believes it to be compatible with his personal interests as a whole. In light of the reward system used in Vietnam, would it have not been personally irrational for some orders to have been obeyed? Was not the military implementing a system which rewarded disobedience while hoping that soldiers, despite the reward system, would obey orders? Medicine. Theoretically, a physician can make either two types of error, and intuitively one seems as bad as the other. A doctor can pronounce a patient sick when he is actually well, thus causing him needless anxiety and expense, curtailment of enjoyable foods and activities, and even physical danger by subjecting him to needless medication and surgery. Alternatively, a doctor can label a sick person well, and thus avoid treating what may be a serious or even fatal ailment. It might be natural to conclude that physicians seek to minimize both types of error. Such a conclusion would be wrong. It is estimated that numerous Americans are presently afflicted with iatrogenic physician-caused illness. This occurs when the doctor is approached by someone complaining of a few stray symptoms. The doctor classifies and organizes these symptoms, gives them a name, and obligingly tells the patient what further symptoms may be expected. This information often acts as a self-fulfilling prophecy, with the result that from day on, the patient, for all practical purposes, is sick. Why does this happen? Why are physicians so reluctant to sustain a type 2 error, aka pronouncing a sick person well, that they will tolerate many type 1 errors? Again, look at the reward system is needed. The punishment for a type 2 error are real guilt, embarrassment, the threat of a lawsuit, and scandal. On the other hand, a type 1 error, labeling a well person sick, is sometimes seen as sound clinical practice, indicating a healthy conservative approach to medicine. Type 1 errors are also likely to generate increased income and a stream of steady customers who, being well in a limited psychological sense, will not embarrass the doctor by dying abruptly. Fellow physicians and general public have therefore are really rewarding the type 1 errors and at the same time hoping fervently that doctors will not try to make them. This is just a paper called On the Folly of Rewarding A While Hoping for B by Stephen Kerr. Kerr. General organizational examples. Rehabilitation centers and orphanages. In terms of the prime beneficiary classification, organizations such as these are supposed to exist for the public in contact, that is, clients. The orphanage, therefore, theoretically, is interested in placing as many children as possible in good homes. However, orphanages surround themselves with so many rules concerning adoption that it is nearly impossible to pry a child out of place. Orphanages may deny adoption unless the applicants are a married couple, both of the same religion as a child, without history of emotional or vocational instability, with a specified minimum income and a private room for the child, etc. If the primary goal is to place the children in good homes, then the rules ought to constitute means toward that goal. Goal displacement results when these means become the end in themselves that displace the original goals. To some extent, these rules are required by law, but the influence of the reward system on the orphanage's management should not be ignored. Consider, for example, that 1. The number of children enrolled is often the most important determinant of the size of the allocated budget. 2. The number of children under the director's care will affect the size of the staff. 3. Total organizational size will determine largely the director's prestige at annual conventions and in the community. Therefore, to the extent that the staff, size, total budget, and personal prestige are valued by the orphanage's executive personnel, it becomes rational for them to make it difficult for children to be adopted. After all, who wants to be the director of the smallest orphanage in the state? If the reward system it seems like an old paper. I don't even know when it's from. If the reward if
The reward system errs in the opposite direction. Paying off only for placements, expensive goal displacement again is likely to result. A common example of vocational rehabilitation in many states, for example, consists of placing someone in a job for which he has little interest and few qualifications for 2 months or so, and then rehabilitating him again under another position. Such behavior is quite consistent with the prevailing reward system, which pays off for the number of individuals placed in any position for 60 days or more. Rehabilitation counselors also confess to competing with one another to place relatively skilled clients, sometimes ignoring persons with few skills who would be harder to place. Extensively disabled clients find that their counselors often prefer to work with those whose disabilities are less severe. Universities. Society hopes that teachers will not neglect their teaching responsibility, but rewards them almost entirely for research and publications. This is most true at the large and prestigious universities. Cliche, Cliches such as good research and good teaching go together, notwithstanding. Professors often find that they must choose between teaching and research oriented activities when allocating their time. Rewards for good teaching usually are limited to outstanding teacher awards, which are given only to small percentages of good teachers, and which usually bestow little money and fleeting prestige. Punishment for poor teaching are also rare. Rewards for research and publication, on the other hand, and punishment for failure to accomplish these are commonly administered by universities at which teachers are employed. Furthermore, publication oriented resumes usually will be well received at other universities, whereas teaching credentials, harder to document and qualify, are much less transferable. Consequently, it is rational for universities and teachers to concentrate on research even to the detriment of teaching and at the expense of their students. By the same token, it is rational for students to act based upon the goal of displacement which has occurred within universities concerning what they are rewarded for. If it is assumed that a primary goal of a university is to transfer knowledge from teacher to student, then grades become identifiable as a means toward that goal, serving as a motivational, control, and feedback device to expedite the knowledge transfer. Instead, however, the grades themselves have become much more important for the entrance to graduate school, successful employment, tuition refunds, parental respect, etc., than the knowledge or lack of knowledge they are supposed to signify. It therefore should come as no surprise that the information has surfaced in recent years concerning fraternity files for examinations, term paper writing services, organized cheating at the service academies, and the like. Such activities constitute a personally rational response to a reward system which pays off for grades rather than knowledge. Business related examples. Ecology. Assume the president of XYZ Corporation is confronted with the following alternatives. He could say it in one paragraph. This is like definitely one of the uh, one of the ways I would like to put this into ChatGPT. 1. Spend $11 million for anti-pollution equipment to keep from poisoning fish in the river adjacent to the plant. Or 2. Do nothing in violation of the law and assume a 1 in 10 chance of being caught with a resultant $1 million fine plus the necessity of buying the equipment. Under this not unrealistic set of choices, it requires no linear program to determine that XYZ Corporation can maximize its probabilities by flouting the law. Add the fact that XYZ's president is probably being rewarded by creditors, stockholders, and other salient parts of his task environment according to criteria totally unrelated to the number of fish poisoned, and his probable course of action becomes clear. It is axiomatic. I don't know what that word means, but I like saying it. That those who care about a firm's, I think it means they relate to each other. It is axiomatic that those who care about a firm's well being should insist that the organization get fair value for its expenditures. Yet it is commonly known that the firms seldom bother to evaluate a new grid, MBO, job enrichment program, or whatever to see if the company is getting its money's worth. Why? Certainly, it is not because people have not pointed out that the situation exists. Numerous practitioners oriented articles are written each year just to this point. The individuals, whether in personnel, manpower planning, or wherever who normally would be responsible for conducting such evaluations are the same ones often charged with introducing the change effort in the first place. Having convinced top management to spend money, they usually are quite animated afterwards in collecting rigorous vignettes and anecdotes about how successful the program was. The last thing many desire is a formal, systematic, and revealing evaluation. Although members of top management may actually hope for such systematic evaluation, their reward system continues to reward ignorance in this area. And if the personnel department advocates its responsibility, who is to step into the breach? The change agent himself? Hardly. He is likely to be too busy collecting anecdotal evidence for his own use with his next client. Miscellaneous. Many additional examples could be cited of systems which, in fact, are rewarding behaviors other than those supposedly desired by the rewarder. A few of these are described briefly below. Most coaches disdain to discuss individual accomplishments, preferring to speak of teamwork, proper attitude, and a one for all spirit. Usually, however, rewards are distributed accordingly to individual performance. The college basketball player who feeds his teammates instead of shooting will not compile impressive scoring statistics and is less likely to be drafted by the pros. The ball player who hits to right field to advance the runners will neither win the batting nor home run titles and will be offered smaller raises. It is therefore rational for players to think of themselves first and the team second. In business organizations where rewards are dispensed for unit performance or for individual goals achieved without regard for overall effectiveness, similar attitudes are often observed. Under most management by objectives MBO systems, goals in areas where it's too many words. Under most management by objective MBO systems, goals in areas where quantification is difficult often go unspecified. The organization, therefore, is in a position where it hopes for employee effort in the areas of team building, interpersonal relationships, creativity, etc., but it formally rewards none of these. In cases where promotions and raises are formally tied to MBO, the system itself contains a paradox in that it asks employees to set challenging, risky goals only to face smaller paychecks and possibly damaged careers if these goals are not accomplished. It is hoped that administrators will pay attention to long run costs and opportunities and will institute programs which will bear fruit later on. However, many organizational reward systems pay off for short run sales and earnings only. Under such circumstances, it is personally rational for officials to sacrifice long term growth and profit by selling off equipment and property or by stifling research and development for short term advantages. This is probably most pertinent in the public sector, with the result that many public officials are unwilling to implement programs which will not show benefits by election time. As a final clear cut example of fouled up reward system, consider the cost plus contract or its next of kin, the allocation of next year's budget as a direct function of this year's expenditures. It is probably conceivable that those who award such budgets and contracts never really hope for the economy and prudence in spending. It is obvious, however, that adopting the proverb, to him who spends shall be more given, rewards not the economy but the spending itself. A manufacturing organization. A Midwest manufacturer of industrial goods had been troubled for some time by aspects of its organizational climate it believed dysfunctional. For research purposes, interviews were conducted with many employees, and a questionnaire was administered on the company's wide basis, including plants and offices in several American and Canadian locations. The company strongly encouraged employee participation in the survey and made available time and space during the workday for completion of the instrument. All employees in attendance during the day of the survey completed the questionnaire. All instruments were collected directly by the researcher who personally administered each session, since no one employee by the firm handled the questionnaires, and since respondent names were not being asked for, it seems likely that the pledge of anonymity given was believed. A modified version of the expect approval scale 7 was included as part of the questionnaire. The instrument asked the respondents to indicate the degree of approval or disapproval they thought they could expect if they performed each of the described actions. A 7-point Likert scale was used, with 1 indicating that the action would probably bring strong disapproval and 7 signifying likely strong approval. Although normative data for this scale from studies of other organizations are unavailable, it is possible to examine fruitfully the data. It is possible to examine fruitfully the data obtained from this survey in several ways. First, it may be worth noting that the questionnaire data corresponded closely with information gathered through interviews. Furthermore, as can be seen from the results summarized in Table 1, sizable differences between various work units and between employees at different job levels with the same work unit were obtained. This suggests that response bias effects, social desirability in particular loomed as a potential concern, are not likely to be severe. Most importantly, comparisons between scores obtained on the expect approval scale and a statement of problems which were the reason for the survey revealed that the same behaviors which managers in each division thought dysfunctional were those which lower level employees claimed were rewarded. That's the table. As compared to job levels 1 to 8 in Division B, those in Division A claimed a much higher acceptance by management of conforming activities. Between 31 and 37% of Division A employees at level 1 through 8 stated that going along with the majority, agreeing with the boss, and staying on everyone's good side brought approval. Only once did a majority suggest that such actions would generate disapproval. Furthermore, responses from Division A workers at levels 1 through 4 indicated that these behaviors geared toward risk avoidance were likely to be rewarded as punished. I'm skipping some stuff, it's so boring. Management apparently was not getting the behaviors it was hoping for, but it was certainly getting the behaviors it perceived by subordinates to be rewarding. An insurance firm. The Group Health Claims Division of a large Eastern insurance company provides another rich illustration of a reward system which reinforces behaviors not desired by top management. Attempting to measure and reward accuracy in paying surgical claims, the first systematically keeps track of the number of returned checks and letters of complaint received from policy holders. However, underpayments are likely to provoke cries of outrage from the insured, while overpayments are often accepted in courteous silence. Since it often is impossible to tell from the physician's statement which of the two surgical procedures with different allowable benefits was performed, and since writing for clarifications will interfere with other standards used by the firm concerning percentage of claims paid with 2 days of receipt, the new hire in more than one claim section is soon acquainted with the informal norm: when in doubt, pay it out. The situation would be even worse were it not for the fact that the other features of the firm's reward system tend to neutralize those described. For example, the annual merit increases are given to all employees in one of the following 3 amounts. 1. If the worker is outstanding, a select category into which no more than 2 employees may be placed. 2. If the worker is above average, normally all workers not outstanding are so rated. 3. If the worker commits gross acts of negligence and irresponsibility for which he may be discharged in many other companies. Now, since the difference between the 5% theoretically attainable through hard work and the 4% attainable merely by living under the review date is small, and since insurance firms seldom dispense much of a salary increase in cash, rather the worker's insurance benefits increase, causing him to be further overinsured. Many employees are rather indifferent to the possibility of obtaining the extra 1% reward and therefore tend to ignore the norm concerning indiscriminate payments. However, most employees are not indifferent to the rule, which states that should absences or lateness total 3 or more in any 6-month period, and the entire 4 or 5% due at the next merit review must be forfeited. In this sense, the firm may be described as hoping for performance while rewarding attendance. What it gets, of course, is attendance. If the absence lateness rule appears to the reader to be stringent. It is really not. The company counts times rather than days absence, and a 10-day absence therefore counts the same as one lasting 2 days. A worker in danger of accumulating a third absence within 6 months merely has to remain ill during his second absence until his first absence is more than 6 months old. This limiting factor is that some point in his salary ceases, his sickness benefits take over, and this is usually sufficient to get the younger workers to return. But for those with 20 or more years of service, the company provides sickness benefits of 90% of normal salary tax free. Therefore, causes. This is the newest book from the Twilight Saga. Were you guys expecting vampires? Extremely diverse instances of systems which Stephanie Meyer really did it with this one. Which reward behavior A, although the rewarder apparently hopes for behavior B, have been given. These are useful to illustrate the breadth and magnitude of the phenomenon, but the diversity increases of the difficulty of determining commonality and establishing causes. However, four general factors may be pertinent to an explanation as to why fouled up reward systems seem to be so prevalent. Fascination with an objective criterion. It has been mentioned elsewhere that most objective measures of productivity are objective only in that their subjective elements are A, determined in advance rather than coming to play at the time of the formal evaluation, and B, well concealed on the rating instrument itself. Thus, industrial firms seeking to devise objective rating systems first decide in an arbitrary manner what dimensions are to be rated, usually including some items having little to do with organizational effectiveness while excluding others that do. Only then does personnel division churn out official looking documents on which all dimensions chosen to be rated are assigned on point values, categories, or whatever. Nonetheless, many individuals seek to establish simple quantifiable standards against which to measure and reward performance. Some efforts may be successful in highly predictable areas with an organization, but are likely to cause This is Britney Spears' biography. But are likely to cause goal displacement when applied anywhere else. Over concern with attendance and lateness in the insurance firm and with number of people placed in the vocational rehabilitation division may have been largely responsible for the problems described in these organizations. Difficulties often stem from the fact that some parts of the task are highly visible while other parts are not. For example, publications are easier to demonstrate than teaching. Scoring baskets and hitting home runs are more readily observable than feeding teammates and advancing base runners. Similarly, the adverse consequences of pronouncing a sick person well are more visible than those sustained by labeling a well person sick. Team building and creativity are other examples of behaviors which may not be rewarded simply because they are hard to deserve. In some instances described, the rewarder may have been getting the desired behavior notwithstanding claims that the behavior was not desired. This may be true, for example, a management's attitude toward apple polishing in the manufacturing firm, a behavior which subordinates felt was rewarded despite management's avowed dislike of the practice. This may also explain politicians' unwillingness to revise penalties for disobedience of ecology laws and the failure of top management to devise reward systems which would cause systematic evaluation of training and development programs. Sometimes consideration of other factors prevents the establishment of a system which rewards behaviors desired by the rewarder. The felt obligation of many Americans to vote for one candidate or another, for example, may impair the ability to withhold support from politicians who refuse to discuss the issues. Similarly, the concern for spreading the risk and cost of wartime military service may outweigh the advantage to be obtained by committing personnel to combat until the war is over. It should be noted that only with respect to the first two causes are the reward systems really paying off for other than desired behaviors. In the case of the third and fourth causes, the system is rewarding behaviors desired by the rewarder, and the systems are fouled up only from the standpoint of those who believe the rewarder's public statements, or those who seek to maximize efficiency rather than outcomes. Many organization theory Modern organization theory requires a recognition that the members of organizations and society possess divergent goals and motives. It is therefore unlikely that managers and their subordinates will seek the same outcomes. Three possible remedies for this potential problem are suggested. 1. Selection. It is theoretically possible for organizations to employ only those individuals whose goals and motives are wholly consonant 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 with those of management. In such cases, the same behaviors judged by subordinates to be rational would be perceived by management as desirable. State of the art reviews of selection techniques, however, provide scant grounds for hope that such an approach would be successful. 2. Training. Another theoretical alternative is for the organization to admit those employees whose goals are not consonant with those of management, and then through training, socialization, or whatever. I love the or whatever is thrown in here. Or whatever may alter employee goals to make them consonant. However, research on the effectiveness of such training programs, though limited, provides further grounds for pessimism. 3. Altering the reward system. What would have been the result if Nixon had been assured by his advisors that he could not win re-election except by discussing the issues in detail? Or if physicians' conduct was subject to regular examination by review boards for type 1 errors, calling healthy people ill, and to penalties like fines and censure for errors of either type? Or that the president of the XYZ Corporation had to choose between spending $11 million for anti pollution equipment and incurring a 50-50 chance of going to jail for 5 years. Managers who complain that their workers are not motivated might do well to consider the possibility that they have installed reward systems which are paying off for behaviors other than those they are seeking. This, in part, is what happened in Vietnam, and this is what regularly frustrates. It's already 5 o'clock. What regularly frustrates societal efforts to bring about honest politicians, civic minded managers. This certainly is what happened in both the manufacturing and insurance companies. A first step for such managers might be to find out what behaviors currently are being rewarded. Perhaps an instrument of similar to that used in the manufacturing firm could be useful for this purpose. Chances are excellent that these managers will be surprised by what they find and that their firms are not rewarding what they assume they are. In fact, such undesirable behavior by organizational members as they have observed may be explained largely by the reward systems in use. That is not to say that all organizational behavior is determined by formal rewards and punishment. Certainly, it is true that in the absence of formal reinforcement, some soldiers will be patriotic, some presidents will be ecology minded, and some orphanage directors will care about children. The point, however, is that in such cases, the rewarder is not causing the behaviors desired, but it is only a fortunate bystander. For an organization to act upon its members, the formal reward system should be positively reinforce desired behaviors, not constitute an obstacle to be overcome. It might be wise to underscore the obvious fact that there is nothing really new in what has been said. In both theory and practice, these matters have been mentioned before. Thus, in states, Good Samaritan laws have been installed to protect doctors who stop to assist a stricken motorist. In states without such laws, it is commonplace for doctors to refuse to stop for fear of involvement in a subsequent lawsuit. In college basketball, additional penalties have been instituted against players who foul their opponents deliberately. It has long been argued by Milton Friedman and others that penalties should be altered so as to make it irrational to disobey the ecology laws, and so on. By altering the reward system of the organizational By altering the reward system, the organization escapes the necessity of selecting only desirable people or trying to alter undesirable ones. In Skinnerian terms, as for responsibility and goodness as commonly defined, no one would want or need them. They refer to a person behaving well despite the absence of positive reinforcement that is obviously sufficient to explain it. Where such reinforcement exists, no one needs goodness. In a, an approach to a spiritual approach to emergent technology, I actually proposed something similar, which is that the monetary system, I got this idea from an ex-boyfriend. Our entire monetary system should be related to good behavior. Honestly, I think yes. Um, and if you could get rich while having good behavior. I have to read a lot more, but I have to go because I have a meetup with other classmates to do other homework. I didn't know homework was going to take the whole weekend, but let's go. Let's go. It's amazing. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. Thanks for listening. I don't think like any. I saw a teacher on TikTok that was like, I explained Watergate to my students, and they're like, that's all? Like, what we're dealing with right now on a corruption level in our faces is like, it's just like, it's right out of the textbook. Like, around 2020, I read this book about someone who had studied how Germany had gone into fascism, and it's like the parallels. I mean, anyone could see the parallels from, a ways away. And it's like, what do you do as a community, as a culture? And then there's like mind control happening, social media and bots, and like just we're beat down. It's like we're just all dealing with our lives and like trying to get by and trying to get through the day and like staying healthy and like trying to eat right and trying to get clean water. It's like even those things take up so much time and so much brain power, and then at the end of the day you're just wiped and you just end up on your little magic screen scrolling. And we learn about all the things, but it's almost like we're desensitized, right? Because we hear about everything that's happening and it's like this onslaught, and there's also nothing that we can apparently do. So then it becomes this sort of malaise of like, wow, I guess the world sucks. So it's very disempowering the way that politics are right now, and I think it's appropriate to look at your own life and just optimize your own joy and optimize your human connections with people and try to give as little as possible, energy to things you can't control. It's good to be aware of it, but like find joy in the like real life stuff, right? Because keep your head about you, have love for other people and don't become a tool of the fascist state, don't become an ICE agent or something. Like keep your head about you and stand up for what's right. Um, but also don't get bogged down in the fact that like there's not that much we can do. Yeah, it's a class war for sure. I love that Candace Owens is like putting the pieces together publicly. It's yeah, it's not um nonpartisan. It's a nonpartisan issue. I mean, it's a dual partisan issue. The whole system is, two wings of the same bird. So, yeah, just clean your house, drink your water, take care of yourself, exercise, keep your body strong. I think keeping your body strong and healthy is like one of the main things you can do in a fascist state to like maintain your power and sense of control of your own autonomy. Not that we're in like hand to hand combat or anything, but having a strong physical body is like um, one of your main sources of power. I can't believe it's already 5 o'clock. I have to eat dinner and do my homework. I don't even know what I'm gonna eat. I might order some food. All right, you guys, I love you so much. Thanks for listening to my homework. I hope you learned something, and I'm sure I will be back online reading more homework at some point. Ooh, I really don't like quinoa.